In 1945, in the Bermuda Triangle, 5 fighter planes vanished without a trace. Distorted radio signals echoed from the cockpit, the transmissions becoming increasingly unclear. The sky, once clear and blue, suddenly turned pitch black, like a storm rising from the very depths of hell. Commander Taylor, leading the squadron, urgently reported, "We don't know where we are." Despite having modern navigation systems, the planes mysteriously lost all communication and were never heard from again. As the crew scrambled for answers, the entire flight vanished without a single clue to explain their disappearance. But few know that many unreported accounts suggest there is more to this mystery than meets the eye. Could there be an invisible force manipulating the waters of this deadly stretch of ocean? Something hidden in plain sight, beyond our understanding, controlling the fate of those who enter its domain? The Bermuda Triangle's true secret remains elusive, but its enigma continues to fascinate the world. At 2 p.m. on December 5, 1945, Commander Taylor received an unusual and disturbing signal through his aircraft's radio. A sharp, crackling noise echoed, and the clarity of the communication rapidly deteriorated. The usual stable transmission turned into a series of garbled static, creating confusion within the cockpit. The pilots were perplexed, but none could immediately identify the cause of the issue. Commander Taylor made the initial decision to turn the flight back to base, suspecting a possible malfunction or interference. The pilots hoped the signal issue was a temporary glitch. However, as they attempted to reverse course, the radio interference became progressively worse. Soon, they realized the issue was not just a minor technical glitch. The aircraft's communication systems failed entirely, leaving them with no means of contacting base. This was the moment when the situation began spiraling into the realm of the unknown. There were no visible signs of mechanical failure or any clear explanation, but the loss of contact marked the beginning of a terrifying ordeal. A sense of uncertainty began to creep in as the pilots faced a growing unease about their circumstances. The once clear blue sky above them began to darken, casting shadows that hinted at something unnatural. The disorientation was palpable, and it became increasingly clear that the situation was no longer under control. Flight 19 had become a mystery in the making. Approximately 15 minutes later, the situation worsened dramatically. A sudden and violent storm began to form around them, cutting off all communication and creating severe turbulence. The communication systems failed completely, leaving the pilots isolated and helpless. The wind speeds that were reported by the planes exceeded the safe threshold for flight, making it extremely difficult to control the aircraft. The crew, already struggling to stay in contact with each other, were now also battling nature's fury. The planes were buffeted by the increasingly powerful gusts, each one stronger than the last, making it near impossible for the pilots to maintain a steady flight path. As the storm's intensity mounted, the pilots were still confused and unsure of their exact location, which exacerbated the crisis. The aircraft's navigational systems, designed to keep them on course and prevent disorientation, failed to deliver accurate data. The once reliable compass and instruments were rendered useless as the storm's ferocity made it impossible to maintain any semblance of direction. Despite attempts to navigate by the position of the sun or the clouds, the pilots were effectively flying blind in a rapidly deteriorating environment. With no communication with base and no clear idea of their position, the pilots' confusion grew. They were unable to orient themselves in the chaotic weather and without any solid guidance. The situation had gone from bad to worse. The pilots, once a cohesive and well-trained group, were now in a state of utter disarray, with little more than their training and intuition to guide them. As the storm intensified, they made frantic efforts to locate one another, but communication failure rendered any efforts to form a coordinated response futile. The disappearance of Flight 19 became inevitable as the storm took its full toll. Without communication, navigational guidance, or any visible landmarks, the planes were swallowed by the elements. The once promising training mission had turned into a catastrophic event, with no clear explanation for the chaos that ensued. At exactly 3:20 p.m., the storm reached its peak, and Flight 19 encountered its final, fatal challenge. The roaring winds and turbulent skies made the aircraft violently shake and disorient the pilots even further. The sound of shaking and rattling in the air grew louder, a physical manifestation of the storm's power, while the sharp smell of burning fuel began to pervade the atmosphere. The mechanical failures that had already begun earlier became catastrophic as the engine sputtered, and the aircraft systems broke down completely. In the chaos, 27 pilots were lost, with no sign of their aircraft, no remains recovered, and no clues left behind. The situation descended into panic. Family members, military personnel, and search teams would later face the overwhelming grief of knowing that these brave individuals were lost to the sea with no trace. The hopelessness of the search would stretch for days, but the planes were never found. The official investigation revealed that the aircraft had simply vanished, leading to the conclusion that the storm, combined with technological failures, was the primary cause. The aftermath left a void. Flight 19, which had set out as a routine training mission, ended in the heart of the Bermuda Triangle, where mystery, death, and the unknown converged. The pilot's tragic disappearance became one of the most infamous mysteries in aviation history, still debated and theorized about today. The emotional and psychological toll on those left behind, families, colleagues, and military personnel, remains part of the lingering legacy of this tragedy. One of the most significant contributing factors to the disappearance of Flight 19 was the design flaws present in the aircraft's control systems. It was later discovered that the transmitter used to communicate with base and fellow pilots had been malfunctioning for some time. This transmitter, a critical part of the aircraft's communication and navigation systems, was operating at only 30% of the required signal output, which greatly hampered the plane's ability to stay in contact with other units or receive vital updates from the ground. The failure of this transmitter created an immediate problem during Flight 19's mission. As the planes flew further into the storm, their reliance on the malfunctioning system prevented the pilots from receiving or sending essential updates. The signal loss made it impossible for the pilots to remain in contact with base, compounding their disorientation and lack of direction. This design flaw was a critical point of failure that severely hindered any attempts to guide the pilots back to safety. After the incident, engineers and investigators revealed that the transmitter had not been properly tested before its deployment, leading to the system's failure under extreme conditions. Had the aircraft been equipped with more robust or reliable communication systems, the pilots would have been able to maintain contact with ground control or at least received assistance as the storm intensified. This design oversight, therefore, played a key role in the eventual loss of the aircraft and the lives of those on board. Another significant technical flaw in the Flight 19 incident was the lack of a reliable weather warning system. The aircraft, despite being advanced for its time, did not have the capability to detect or receive automatic alerts about sudden, extreme weather changes. The absence of real-time weather warnings left the pilots vulnerable as they encountered a violent storm. As the wind speeds exceeded safe thresholds, the aircraft should have been alerted to the imminent danger, allowing the pilots to take corrective action or even return to base. However, the aircraft's weather warning system was inadequate, leading to a failure in detecting the storm early enough for the pilots to change course. Data retrieved later revealed that the weather system was highly prone to malfunction, and previous flights had also experienced issues with unreliable alerts. This lack of weather awareness resulted in the pilots flying directly into the storm without understanding the full extent of the danger. The failure of these critical systems left the pilots with no choice but to rely on their instincts and knowledge, which, in extreme weather conditions, proved insufficient. The inability to warn the pilots of the impending storm was a failure that contributed heavily to the eventual disaster. The mystery of Flight 19 echoes a much earlier disappearance in the Bermuda Triangle region, the 1942 disappearance of a similar flight. That incident involved a squadron of planes that, like Flight 19, lost communication and mysteriously vanished, leaving no trace of their whereabouts. Both events shared eerie similarities, such as the failure of navigational systems and the lack of communication despite modern technology. The commonality between the two cases, disappearance without explanation, loss of contact with ground control, and the inability to recover the wreckage, has fueled ongoing speculation about the Bermuda Triangle's enigmatic role in these disappearances. Investigators have noted how environmental factors, such as sudden changes in wind, storms, and magnetic interference, could have caused both incidents to unfold similarly. These connections between the 1942 and 1945 disappearances strengthen the theory that extreme weather conditions and systemic failures in aviation technology contributed significantly to the mysterious losses. Both cases have also prompted calls for greater scrutiny of the Bermuda Triangle region, and many theories abound about what might be causing such inexplicable events. Yet, despite the investigations, the Bermuda Triangle remains one of the most unexplained phenomena in aviation history, with Flight 19 as one of its most tragic and unresolved mysteries. Commander Taylor fell victim to cognitive bias, particularly the overconfidence effect, which led him to make decisions that escalated the disaster. Despite weather warnings and the increasing severity of the storm, Taylor believed that his crew, with their advanced training, could handle the situation. He felt a sense of self-assurance that led him to dismiss the risk of continuing the flight into such treacherous conditions. Taylor's decision to proceed despite warnings from the base was influenced by his own belief that he could manage the storm and that his crew was prepared for it. This overconfidence clouded his judgment and led him to believe that the storm could be navigated through skill alone, disregarding the fact that the pilots were operating in extreme, unpredictable conditions. This bias toward underestimating the danger of the storm likely contributed to the pilot's failure to make an early return to base or take necessary evasive actions. The overconfidence effect is a common psychological phenomenon, particularly in high-stakes situations, and it significantly impacted the flight's outcome. Commander Taylor's misjudgment of the storm's potential for destruction is a tragic example of how cognitive biases can lead even the most experienced professionals into making disastrous decisions. At the core of the tragedy was the pressure placed by the United States Air Force to complete the mission, regardless of the worsening conditions. Mission objectives often take precedence in military operations, and this focus led to the decision to push forward despite the increasingly dangerous storm. Commander Taylor and the pilots were under immense pressure to complete the training exercise and fulfill the goals set by their superiors. This emphasis on mission success over safety highlights a systemic issue within military operations, where the completion of the mission is prioritized over the well-being of personnel. The decision to continue flying, despite the clear warnings of an impending storm, can be attributed to the belief that the mission must be completed. This pressure can sometimes cloud decision-making processes and cause those involved to overlook safety protocols and risk assessments. While the pilots were trained to handle difficult conditions, the combination of unpredictable weather and the lack of support led to a tragic outcome. There was a pervasive culture of silence within the squadron, where some pilots felt unable to speak out about dangerous conditions during flight. This silence led to a lack of adequate feedback and an unwillingness to challenge the decisions being made. Commander Taylor, while an experienced leader, did not fully engage with his crew's concerns and dismissed warnings about the storm. Some pilots later recalled feeling hesitant to report the dangers they observed, as they feared reprimand or a negative impact on their reputation. This culture of silence prevented open communication during critical moments. Had the pilots been able to voice their concerns more freely, the situation might have been assessed differently, and more safety measures could have been implemented. The culture of silence created an environment where decision-makers, including Commander Taylor, did not receive all the relevant information, which ultimately contributed to the failure to avert disaster. Commander Taylor utilized advanced navigation techniques developed from his extensive military experience in an attempt to guide the aircraft through the storm. He was well-versed in military flight tactics and had been trained to handle extreme conditions. His skills were critical in trying to steer the planes away from the worst of the storm. Despite his expertise, the situation grew progressively worse, and no amount of training could overcome the brutality of the weather. Taylor's efforts to keep the planes in the air, guiding them through the worst of the storm using his leadership and expertise, were valiant but ultimately futile. The storm was simply too powerful, and without sufficient support from the aircraft systems or timely communication, there was little hope for survival. His attempts at navigation through the storm were an example of his determination and skills, but also of the limitations that even the most experienced military pilots face when the odds are stacked too high. The crew attempted to find their way back for about 30 minutes following the breakdown of communication systems. Their efforts were focused on gaining some semblance of control over their direction, but the storm's ferocity and the failure of essential systems meant that the chances of survival were nearly impossible. Despite their best efforts, the pilots were overwhelmed by the conditions, and the situation only deteriorated further as time passed. Their efforts were brave, but the lack of modern navigational tools and the overwhelming storm ultimately sealed their fate. 27 deaths occurred, with an estimated $100 million in damages. The U.S. Air Force subsequently improved its weather warning systems to prevent future incidents and better protect pilots in hazardous conditions. In just 20 minutes, the Flight 19 disappearance turned the Bermuda Triangle from a mere tourist destination into a legendary, mysterious zone that captured the world's imagination. The 27 missing pilots serve as a stark warning of the hidden dangers lurking in the skies. The costly price of overconfidence and unforeseen technical failures shaped this disaster, etching it into aviation history as one of the greatest unsolved mysteries. This tragedy was more than just a failure of aviation technology. It stands as a sobering reminder of ignoring critical warnings in life-threatening situations. The U.S. Air Force paid the ultimate price, realizing too late that careless decisions can lead to catastrophic outcomes. Flight 19 proved that vigilance is often the key to survival. The $100 million loss and the 27 lives lost in a moment's hesitation serve as an enduring lesson that the cost of negligence is far greater than imagined. The effect of small errors, like the breakdown in communication systems, spiraled into a chain of events that led to disaster, a phenomenon known as the domino effect. The aviation industry was irrevocably changed after Flight 19's disappearance. In the wake of the incident, the industry saw improved weather forecasting and alert systems, more rigorous pilot training for emergency scenarios, updated emergency protocols. These updates aim to prevent a future repeat of such a tragedy, ensuring that the lessons learned from Flight 19 would save lives in the future. Could the Bermuda Triangle really be hiding mysteries still beyond our understanding? Share your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe for more thrilling insights as we continue unraveling the world's greatest enigmas.